His name was John Layden. He had been an air traffic controller for 11 years. He worked at JFK Airport in New York. Every single day, he sat in a darkened room staring at a radar screen and guided hundreds of aircraft carrying thousands of human beings safely through one of the busiest pieces of airspace on Earth. It was hard work, mentally exhausting in a way that's almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't done it. You are responsible, personally, directly, immediately responsible for whether people live or die. Every decision, every instruction, every second of every shift. John was good at it. He was proud of it. He had spent 11 years mastering it. On August 3rd, 1981, John went on strike. He didn't want to. Not exactly. He wanted better working conditions, shorter shifts, more controllers hired so the workload wasn't killing people, a pay raise that reflected the extraordinary stress and responsibility of the job. Reasonable things, human things. PATCO, the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, his union. They had been negotiating with the federal government for months. The negotiations had failed, and so they struck. 43% of America's air traffic controllers walked off the job that Monday morning. Ronald Reagan gave them 48 hours to return to work. They didn't. On August 5th, 1981, Ronald Reagan fired all of them. End IDAs. Ronald Reagan fired all of them. 11,345 people gone. In a single day, their careers over, their federal pensions forfeited, banned from ever working as federal air traffic controllers again, for life. John Layden never worked as an air traffic controller again. And something happened that day that went far beyond John, far beyond PATCO, far beyond air traffic control. Something shifted in America, something fundamental and permanent and devastating for every working person who came after. The message went out. From the White House to every boardroom in America, from every corporation to every worker, from capital to labor. The message was simple, 4 words: we don't need you. And American workers have been living with the consequences of that message ever since. Okay, let me back up, way back. Because to understand August 5th, 1981, you need to understand what came before it. You need to understand what American workers had, what they had built, what was taken from them. Let's go back to the 1930s. America is in the Great Depression, the worst economic catastrophe in American history. 25% unemployment, breadlines, families losing everything, a country on its knees, and workers are suffering, not just from the depression, from a labor system that had always been brutal. 12-hour days, 6-day weeks, no overtime pay, no safety regulations, no health care, no pensions, no job security. You worked or you starved. And if you got hurt on the job, that was your problem. Child labor was common. 10-year-olds in coal mines, 12-year-olds in textile mills. 14-hour days, because nobody had stopped it. Nobody had the power to stop it. And then, slowly, painfully, through strikes and marches and confrontations that sometimes turned violent, through organizing and solidarity and the sheer human refusal to accept being treated as less than human, workers built power. The labor movement of the 1930s and 1940s was one of the most important social movements in American history. It gave us the 8-hour workday, the weekend, overtime pay, the minimum wage, the end of child labor, workplace safety regulations, healthcare benefits, pensions, paid vacations. None of these things were gifts from generous employers. Every single one of them was fought for, bled for, sometimes literally. The labor movement of the 20th century gave ordinary working people a share of the prosperity they created, and by 1955, union membership in the private sector reached its peak. About 35% of American workers were union members. 1 in 3. And those workers had something real, something worth having. A union contract meant guaranteed wages, guaranteed benefits, a grievance process if you were treated unfairly, a voice, an actual voice in the terms of your own employment, the ability to say no, the ability to push back, the ability to negotiate, dignity. That's what the union gave workers. Not just money, dignity. The dignity of being a party to the terms of your own working life. Not just an object to be used and discarded, and the economy reflected it. The 30 years after World War II, the period economists call the Great Compression. The period where wages rose fastest at the bottom and the middle, where inequality actually declined, where the gap between the richest and the rest shrank, where a factory worker could genuinely afford a house and a car and a family and a retirement, because workers had power, real power, the power to withhold their labor, the power to organize, the power to say enough. That power was everything. And then came August 5th, 1981. To understand what Reagan did that day, you need to understand Ronald Reagan. And here is the complicated truth about Ronald Reagan. He was not a stupid man. He was not an evil man in the mustache-twirling cartoon villain sense. He was a man with a genuine and deeply held ideology, an ideology that believed in a very specific vision of how the American economy should work. That vision went something like this. The free market is the most efficient allocator of resources in human history. Government interference in the market makes things worse. Regulation kills business. Taxes kill investment. Unions distort the natural relationship between workers and employers and make American businesses less competitive. In this vision, the interests of workers and the interests of corporations were not in conflict. They were aligned. If you freed corporations from regulation and unions and taxation, they would invest, they would grow, they would create jobs, and the prosperity would flow down to everyone. Trickle-down economics. Supply side. Reaganomics. Call it what you want. The theory was that freeing capital from constraints would ultimately benefit labor. What actually happened was different. But in 1981, Reagan believed it, and when Patco went on strike, he saw an opportunity to signal to the country and to American business what kind of president he was going to be and what kind of relationship he expected between workers and employers. He fired them, all of them, because he could, because they were federal employees, and federal employees cannot legally strike because the law was on his side, because it sent a message he wanted to send, and that message was received. Loudly, clearly, permanently. The corporate world was watching, carefully. For decades, American corporations had been dealing with unions, negotiating contracts, paying wages and benefits that reflected the bargaining power of organized workers. Not happily, in many cases, but accepting it as the reality of doing business in America. When Reagan fired 11,000 federal workers for striking, the corporate world saw something new. They saw that the rules had changed, that the political climate had shifted, that the government that was supposed to be a neutral arbiter between labor and capital had chosen a side. Clearly and unmistakably chosen a side, and corporations began to act accordingly. Before 1981, when workers at a company went on strike, replacing them permanently with new workers, strike breakers, scabs, however you want to call them, was legally possible but socially and practically very difficult. Other unions would refuse to cross picket lines. Public sympathy was often with the strikers. The costs of a protracted labor battle were high enough that corporations usually preferred to negotiate. After 1981, permanent replacement of striking workers became standard corporate strategy. Reagan had shown it could be done, had shown the government wouldn't stop it. had shown that breaking unions was politically acceptable. Company after company adopted it. When workers struck, they hired replacements, permanent replacements, and the strike, the most fundamental tool of labor power, became something workers could no longer really use, because striking meant losing your job permanently to someone who needed work and would accept the old terms or worse. The weapon was neutralized, and then came the offshoring. This is the second massive shift that followed the signal of 1981. If American workers are too expensive, if American unions have made American labor costs too high, if American workers have the audacity to demand decent wages and benefits and working conditions, there are workers in other countries who will work for much less, much less. Workers in Mexico, in China, in Vietnam, in Bangladesh, in countries where there are no unions, no environmental regulations, no safety requirements, no minimum wages that an American worker would recognize. Move the factories there, and they did. Slowly at first, then faster, then as fast as they possibly could. The steel mills that had employed hundreds of thousands of American workers, gone. The textile factories, gone. The electronics manufacturing, gone. The auto parts suppliers, going. One by one, decade by decade, the jobs that had supported the working class of America, shipped overseas to places where workers had no power at all, and the workers left behind, the workers who had spent 20 years mastering a skill, building a life in a company town, raising their families with the assumption that the mill would always be there. They were told this was the market, efficiency, progress, that new jobs would come, better jobs, service jobs, knowledge economy jobs. Some of that was true. New jobs did come, but not to the same people, not to the 52-year-old steel worker whose plant closed, not to the 48-year-old textile worker whose mill moved to Honduras, not to the communities built around single industries that simply ceased to exist. Those people, many of them, never recovered. Economically, psychologically, the communities they lived in, many of them never recovered either. The opioid crisis that devastated working-class communities across America in the 2000s and 2010s, it did not appear randomly. It appeared specifically in the communities that had lost their industrial base, the places where the jobs went and never came back. The connection is not subtle. Despair is not subtle. Now, let's talk about what replaced the union job, because something did replace it. Eventually, a new kind of work emerged, and it was sold as liberation, as flexibility, as the future of work. The gig economy. Drive for Uber, deliver for DoorDash, freelance on Fiverr, contract for whoever needs you whenever they need you. Be your own boss. Set your own hours. Work when you want. Sounds great. Sounds like freedom. Here is what gig economy work actually is. You are classified as an independent contractor, not an employee. That classification is everything, because independent contractors are not entitled to minimum wage protections, not entitled to overtime, not entitled to employer-provided healthcare, not entitled to unemployment insurance if the work dries up, not entitled to workers' compensation if they're injured on the job, not entitled to any of the protections that the labor movement spent a century fighting for. You supply your own car, your own equipment, your own phone. You bear your own expenses, and you pay both halves of the Social Security and Medicare tax, the employee half and the employer half, because you are technically your own employer. The company gets all the benefits of having employees, the labor, the service, the value, with none of the obligations, no benefits to provide, no minimum hours to guarantee, no job security to offer. Perfect flexibility, perfect efficiency, for the company, for the worker, precarity, complete Total, unrelenting precarity. No stability, no benefits, no future. Just the next ride, the next delivery, the next gig. An infinite present tense with no past and no future. This is what replaced the union job. This is what the 40-year destruction of organized labor produced. This is the logical endpoint of the direction set on August 5th, 1981. We went from a factory worker with a union contract, a pension, healthcare, paid vacations, job security, and a genuine voice in his own working life, to a gig worker driving his own car, delivering someone else's food, with no benefits, no security, no voice, and no future. And we were told this was progress. Let me give you some numbers. Because the numbers tell the story clearly. In 1965, the CEO of a major American corporation made about 20 times what the average worker at that company made. 20 times. That was considered well compensated. That was the going rate for executive talent. Today, the average CEO of an S&P 500 company makes 350 times what the average worker makes. 350 times. Think about that ratio. If the average worker makes $60,000 per year, the CEO makes $21 million per year in salary and bonuses and stock options and benefits. Where did that money come from? It didn't materialize from thin air. It came from the same pool of money that used to be distributed more broadly through wages and benefits and pensions. It came from workers, from the part of the value that workers create that used to go back to workers. The pie didn't get smaller. The slice going to workers got smaller, and the slice going to executives and shareholders got larger. Union membership in 1955. 35% of private sector workers. Union membership today. 6% of private sector workers. 6. When 1 in 3 workers was unionized, wages rose with productivity. When a company got more profitable, because workers got more productive, the workers shared in that prosperity. Since the decline of unions, productivity has risen 60% since 1979. Worker wages, adjusted for inflation, have risen 16%. 16% for 60% more productivity. The rest went somewhere, to shareholders, to executives, to the top. That transfer, that massive, decades-long transfer of wealth from workers to capital, that is the direct consequence of the destruction of union power. That started on August 5th, 1981. Now, let me tell you about Amazon, because Amazon is the perfect modern embodiment of what August 5th, 1981 made possible. Jeff Bezos, one of the richest men in human history, a company worth more than $1 trillion, and in Amazon's warehouses, the places where the packages that make Bezos's fortune are picked and packed and shipped. Workers stand on concrete floors for 10 and 12-hour shifts. They walk 15 to 20 miles a day inside those warehouses. They have productivity quotas that are tracked by computer systems in real time. Every second of their shift monitored. Every bathroom break noted. Workers who fall behind their quotas receive automated warnings. 3 warnings and you're fired. By an algorithm. Not a person. An algorithm. The injury rate in Amazon warehouses is roughly twice the industry average for warehouse work, which is already a dangerous industry. Because the quotas push people to move faster than is safe, to take risks with their bodies that they wouldn't otherwise take. Because the algorithm doesn't care about your back. The algorithm cares about the package rate. Workers have described urinating in bottles because they were afraid to take bathroom breaks that would hurt their productivity numbers. In the richest company in the history of human commerce, workers urinating in bottles. Amazon has fought union organizing relentlessly and ruthlessly. They have closed facilities where organizing efforts gained traction. They have mandatory anti-union meetings where managers deliver presentations about why unions are bad for workers. They have fired organizers. They have surveilled union activity because they learned the lesson of August 5th, 1981. The lesson that says, you can do this. The government won't stop you. The political climate allows it. Workers can be kept powerless if you are aggressive enough about it. And mostly, they've been right. In 2022, workers at an Amazon facility on Staten Island voted to unionize, the first successful Amazon union in America. It made international news because it was so rare, one facility out of hundreds. After decades of trying, after countless firings and retaliation and mandatory anti-union meetings, that is how completely the lesson of 1981 has been absorbed. But let me be fair here, because fairness requires it. Some things changed after 1981 that genuinely benefited workers in certain ways. The economy grew substantially. The GDP of the United States in 1981 was roughly $3 trillion. Today it is $27 trillion. Enormous growth, real growth, growth that created new industries, new jobs, new opportunities that didn't exist before. Technology improved. The gig economy, for all its flaws, did create genuine flexibility for some workers. Some people genuinely prefer it, particularly workers who have other income sources or who value flexibility over security. Consumer prices for many goods dropped dramatically. Globalization, the offshoring of manufacturing, made cheap goods available to American consumers. A television that cost 3 months of a factory worker's salary in 1970 costs a few hours of minimum wage work today. Clothes are cheaper. Electronics are cheaper. Many things that used to be luxuries are now accessible to working-class families. And some unions had become corrupt. Some union leadership had prioritized protecting their own power over serving their members. Some work rules had become genuinely inefficient in ways that hurt competitiveness. Not every union practice was defensible, so I'm not saying everything about the pre-1981 world was perfect. It wasn't. But here is the thing. The growth happened. The wealth was created. Trillions and trillions of dollars of additional wealth in the American economy over the last 40 years. And almost none of it went to workers. That's the problem. Not the growth itself. Not globalization itself. Not technology itself. The distribution. The decision about who benefits from the growth. That decision was made, consciously, deliberately. Reagan made it on August 5th, 1981, and every Congress and administration since has largely ratified it. The tools that workers could use to bargain for their share, systematically dismantled. And the result, a 40-year transfer of wealth from the many to the few that has produced the most extreme inequality America has seen since the Gilded Age. Let me tell you what this has done to actual people. Not statistics, people. A man named Gary worked at a steel mill in Youngstown, Ohio, for 23 years. The mill closed in 1985 and moved production to South Korea. Gary was 41 years old with a high school diploma and 23 years of skills that were no longer needed anywhere near Youngstown. He spent the next 20 years working a series of jobs: warehouse work, truck driving, security guard. Nothing that paid what the mill paid. Nothing with the benefits the mill had. Nothing with a pension. He is 68 now. He works part-time at a hardware store. Not because he loves it, because Social Security alone isn't enough, and he never accumulated enough in savings to retire. Gary is not unusual. Gary is Youngstown. Gary is Flint. Gary is Gary, Indiana. Gary is the places that built America and were abandoned by America when the calculation changed, and it was cheaper to build somewhere else. A woman named Maria worked at a textile factory in South Carolina for 18 years. The factory moved to Mexico in 1998. She was 45 years old. She had never worked anywhere else. Her entire adult working life had been spent at that factory. She found work eventually. at a Walmart that had opened near where the factory used to be. For less money. No benefits for 2 years because they kept her part-time. No pension, no union. She is now 72 and still working at Walmart. Not by choice. And a young man named Tyler who graduated from college in 2012 with a degree in communications who has never had a job with health insurance, who has worked as a freelancer, a gig worker, a contractor, a part-timer for 12 years, who is 34 years old and has no retirement savings and no clear path to any, who has been told his entire working life that this is the new normal, that flexibility is freedom, that the gig economy is opportunity. He doesn't feel free. He feels exhausted and scared and invisible. Gary and Maria and Tyler. 3 generations. 3 different experiences of the same thing. The slow, deliberate dismantling of the idea that work should come with security. That showing up every day deserves something in return, beyond a paycheck that barely covers the basics. All of them living downstream of August 5th, 1981. Now, something is changing, slowly, imperfectly, incompletely, but genuinely. The Amazon Union on Staten Island, the Starbucks union wave that has spread to hundreds of stores across the country, the UAW strike of 2023, where auto workers walked out against all 3 major American automakers simultaneously and won significant wage increases. The teachers' strikes that have swept through state after state, healthcare workers organizing in record numbers, young workers especially, workers who grew up in the gig economy, who have never had a pension, who have never had job security, who have student loan debt and can't afford housing, and are angry in a way that their parents' generation sometimes isn't. They are organizing, not at the pace of the 1930s, not with the power of the peak union years, but more than has happened in decades, because they understand something. Something that workers before 1981 understood, and that the decades since tried to make people forget. You are not alone. The conditions of your working life are not your personal problem. They are the result of collective decisions made by powerful interests. And they can be changed by collective decisions made by organized workers. That understanding, that simple, powerful, historically proven understanding, slowly, but it is coming back. And here is what I want to say about Ronald Reagan specifically. Because this video is not really about Ronald Reagan. Not personally. Reagan was the instrument of a moment, not the cause of it. The forces that dismantled worker power in America were larger than one president. They would have found their instrument even if Reagan had lost in 1980. But Reagan is important because he gave it a face, a specific face, a friendly face, a reassuring voice, a grandfatherly manner that made what was being done to workers feel like common sense rather than class warfare. He made people who were being harmed by his policies vote for him enthusiastically. He made working-class Americans believe that the interests of corporations were their interests, that what was good for business was good for them, that unions were the problem rather than the solution. That was the real genius of Reaganism, not the economic theory, the political packaging, the ability to convince workers that the tools protecting them were actually hurting them, that the cage was freedom. And it worked. For a while. Long enough to do the damage. So, what do we do now? Because we are living in the world that August 5th, 1981 built. That is not deniable. But we are not helpless in it. Support unions. This is the most direct thing. When workers at a company try to organize, support them. Shop at unionized businesses when you can. Refuse to cross picket lines. Understand that union wages raise all wages in a sector because non-union employers have to compete. Demand labor law reform. The laws governing union organizing in America are tilted heavily against workers. The penalties for illegal union busting are laughably small. The process for organizing is designed to give employers maximum opportunity to interfere. Labor law that actually protected the right to organize, that actually enforced penalties against retaliation, would change the calculus dramatically. Reclassify gig workers. The independent contractor classification is being used as a legal fiction to deny basic protections to millions of workers. Several states have moved to address this. Federal legislation could address it comprehensively. Workers who work for a single company, whose work the company controls and directs, should be employees. Period. Hold corporations accountable for offshoring. Tax policy can influence where companies choose to invest and hire. Trade policy can require labor standards from trading partners. These are not simple problems, but they are policy choices. Different choices are possible. Vote like a worker, not like a shareholder, not like the person you hope to be someday, like the person you are. Len Purskur, Deep Key, like the worker whose wages and benefits and working conditions are determined by the political environment that elections create. Because here is the fundamental truth. The destruction of worker power in America was not a natural phenomenon. It was not the weather. It was not gravity. It was not inevitable. It was a choice made by specific people, in specific rooms, on specific days. August 5th, 1981 was one of those days. And the rebuilding of worker power will also be a choice made by specific people, in specific moments, through specific actions. The question is whether enough people understand what was taken from them, whether enough people are angry enough and organized enough to take it back. John Leyden understands. He was never bitter, by most accounts, but he understood what happened, what it meant, what it cost. He understood that the day he lost his job was the day something much bigger was lost, something that belonged not just to him, but to every working person in America who came after him. The question is whether we understand it too, whether we remember, whether we act. On August 5th, 1981, 11,345 people lost their jobs. And 40 years of working Americans lost something they are still fighting to get back. Their power, their voice, their dignity, their share. The work continues. Every union contract signed, every organized drive won, every worker who stands up and says, "No, this is not enough. I deserve better. We deserve better." The work continues, and it will continue until the promise is kept. Until the work that built this country is valued by the country it built. Until workers matter again. Thanks for watching. If this one made you angry, good. Share it. Someone needs to hear this today. See you in the next one.